Tax reform should include closing loopholes. Okay, what exactly counts as a loophole to Speaker John Boehner? What President Obama's been proposing is stuff like no more tax subsidies for big oil companies. That's not the oil company's tax rate. That is a loophole through which they get taxpayer money. How about the tax subsidy for corporate jets? That's a loophole. How about the individual deductions on income that only rich people earn, that only rich people claim? Those are loopholes. Can those all be closed? Because those are many of the pay-fors that President Obama has been proposing for his jobs plan that Republicans, at least before today, were making lots of noises about rejecting out of hand. For all that was astonishing and at times laugh-out-loud funny about John Boehner's economy speech today, is there actually a ray of hope here? Is he doing what Jimmy Carter said today that Republicans would end up doing about this, which is that they would take on some of this jobs plan and go with it? Could some of this stuff pass? Joining us now is Chris Hayes, host of MSNBC's newest show, which is called Up with Chris Hayes. Chris's new show debuts this Saturday morning. Chris will be starting out with a major guest. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi will be on at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Congratulations again on the show, Chris. It is good to see you.
It's great to see you, and I have another amazing guest on Sunday.
Who?
Rachel Maddow, host of the Rachel Maddow Show on MSNBC.
I was going to put on an ill-fitting blazer and just hang around the studio and hope you'd ask me to sit down, but now I will take that as an invitation. That's excellent. Thank you.
That would be great.
I have to tell you, Chris, that I have done two-thirds of this segment with no teleprompter.
No.
Tonight, which is why I have been not making eye contact with anybody. And so I am warming up the technical failures for you.
That was a
getting
long
them all,
read with
getting them all, exactly. I'm getting all of the technical failures out of the system so that by the time you roll in on Saturday, stuff is going to be clean.
That is kind of you. On the other hand, you have now seeded a new nightmare for me to have in the next 48 hours.
Ta-da! All right, John Boehner's speech today. A lot of people are reacting to John Boehner's speech today by saying, oh, he's being so snarky and negative and obstructionist about the Republicans' proposals. I feel like he left some wiggle room, maybe on infrastructure, but sort of maybe definitely on what he's calling tax loopholes. Did you see any sort of little ray of sunshine here in terms of hope for a jobs bill?
I think, yes. I mean, I do think there are going to be some items that they can find agreement on. My worry is that the Venn diagram, the intersection of those two sets, the president's bill on the one side and what John Boehner can get his caucus to agree to on the other, are going to be the least effective parts of the legislation. So, for instance, there's this tax credit, this sort of tax credit incentive to employers that hire workers off unemployment. And I think, I don't think it's terrible policy, but it's not the most effective part of the bill. The most effective is the unemployment insurance extension, I think. And so the question is, do the things they agree upon end up as being the worst part substantively of the bill, which, if I had to bet now, is probably where things are headed?
Well, if the president introduced this as a single piece of legislation, I think it gave him mostly the opportunity to talk about all of the different things it does all of the time, so he can give big stump speeches about it where he gets a lot of applause lines and gets people motivated behind the idea that he could do something. The other reason to propose a big package of legislation is that then you can pass pieces of it. Do you feel like it is substantively important whether or not this is pushed for by the White House as a single unified piece of legislation that can't be broken apart?
I do insofar as the parts that would be broken out are very important parts, like unemployment insurance. So and the school and the stuff they want to do on school refurbishing, which is about $35 billion of actual hiring people to go do construction that is very useful construction in the long term, represents a long-term investment. There are a lot of parts of these bill that I think fall on the more kind of democratic spectrum of things, the more progressive spectrum of things, and I worry about those being sort of thrown by the wayside if it is broken into parts. If you break it up into parts, first of all, we got to remember we continue to deal with a massive what economists call an output gap, which is what the difference between what this economy could produce and what it is producing. It remains huge, and $450 billion is not big enough to plug it. So we are already dealing with a sort of plug that's too small for the whole. If you start to pare that down, you start to end up in a situation where the final impact, while it has actual definitive positive results in real people's lives, at the macro level isn't doing what you wanted to do in terms of the growth rate and unemployment.
In terms of the president's options here and his means of moving forward, how important is it that Senator Bob Casey, Democratic senator ostensibly, Jim Webb, Mary Landrieu, other Democrats are complaining about the Jobs Act in public to the press by name, including complaining about the president's perceived motives on the Jobs Act?
I thought those quotes were really shocking that were in the New York Times, and I think they were shocking for reasons. One, Tom Carper in Delaware had this quote where he basically parroted a completely ahistorical, empirically ignorant and economically ignorant theory of the case in which we have to have long-range deficit reduction in order. That's what a real jobs bill looks like. I mean, that is what extreme right-wing senators say. Here is a Democrat from a safe state of Delaware saying that kind of thing. It is craziness, and the only reason I think he's saying it is because they believe it. They all believe, they have all bought this big lie of the fact that long-term deficit reduction is actually what is going to get the economy going in the short term, and there is essentially no evidence for that. So the hope is that Barack Obama can get all these Democratic politicians in a room and convince them that their political fates are tied to two things: the President of the United States' political performance and the substantive performance of the economy, and their best bet on both scores is the American Jobs Act.
Chris Hayes, host of the new show, Up with Chris Hayes, which starts this weekend. Chris, thank you very much for joining us and not making fun of me for not being able to make eye contact.
No, you did splendidly as always, Rachel. I'll see you this weekend.
Indeed. Thanks. A reminder, Chris's show debuts this weekend, this Saturday morning. His special guest will be House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, joining him at 8 a.m. And I am going to get up extra early on Sunday and come down there and loom, especially because Chris just said I am allowed to be on the show on Sunday. Really looking forward to that. All right, I've been waiting for this for a long time. This morning I had the honor to interview the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, at the Carter Center here in Atlanta.
I referred to Gerald Ford, who was incumbent president, as my distinguished opponent, and he referred to me that way. I did the same thing 4 years later with Ronald Reagan. And we didn't even accept any campaign contributions.
My distinguished opponent and no campaign contributions. My exclusive interview with President Jimmy Carter, which has a lot of surprises in it. It's coming up.